One crumpled note, one desperate cry. But it was the dog who answered first. The summer heat pressed heavy on the forgotten road, where no one stopped, except one battle-worn K9, 6 years old, ears torn, eyes sharp. Clenched in his jaws, a paper smudged with fear. Drawn in shaky lines, a house, a face, and a single word, help. No one else would have known where to look. No one else would have felt what he did. But he did. And what he led the soldier to wasn't just a hidden child. It was a truth buried in dust, a cry scrawled in crayon, and a promise that one man and one dog would never break. This is the story of a girl in a pink dress, a haunted past, and how a silent bark rewrote fate. Before we begin, hit that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you believe no child should be left unheard, type Amen in the comments. Let her know the world still listens. Millstone, Arizona in mid-July was the kind of hot that felt personal. The morning sun hadn't even climbed fully over the horizon, yet the air already shimmered above the asphalt, and the concrete porch of the Carter home radiated heat like it had been storing it for years. Flies buzzed in lazy circles, and the distant whir of a broken fan echoed from somewhere down the block. There wasn't a breeze, not even a whisper. Just sweat, silence, and sun. Jack Carter leaned on the doorframe of the old house, shirt clinging to his back, a hand wrapped loosely around a sweating glass of lemonade that was already warm. 26, freshly home on a 2-week leave from an infantry unit stationed in North Carolina, he had the look of a man trained to endure discomfort, but not the kind that stuck to your skin and seeped into your bones like desert heat. His brown hair was buzzed close to the scalp, his hazel eyes heavy with a restlessness that no nap could fix, and his posture, straight-backed, alert, made him look older than he was. A faint tan line ghosted his wrist where a watch used to be. His uniform was in the closet, but the weight of it hadn't left. He'd come home to escape the noise, but Millstone's quietness was another kind of pressure. The porch creaked behind him. He turned and froze. Standing at the bottom of the steps was a dog. Not just any mutt, but a broad-shouldered German Shepherd mix, dusty and gaunt, with black and tan fur that dulled to a dry gray around the edges. The dog's right ear was notched, as if something had torn it once, and its left flank bore a faint, hairless scar. But it stood with a composure that wasn't wild. No darting eyes, no tail-tucked fear. This was a dog that had once known commands, structure, maybe war. In its mouth, clutched delicately between yellowed teeth, was a folded, crumpled piece of paper. Jack blinked. "You lost, buddy?" The dog didn't answer, of course. Instead, it padded forward, calm as you please, up the porch steps, and laid the paper gently at Jack's boots. Then it stepped back and sat, upright, watching him. Jack set down his glass. The paper was damp with saliva, its corners torn, creased from countless folds. He bent, picked it up, and unfolded it carefully. His hands were calloused, steady. The handwriting hit him like a punch to the chest. "Please help. No windows, so dark." Childlike, uneven, as if written in haste or fear. No name, no address. On the back, a shaky pencil sketch, an L-shaped building, a staircase drawn descending, and a single arrow pointing down. He looked back at the dog. It hadn't moved. From the side yard came a rustle, then a voice, dry, familiar. "Scout back at it again?" Jack turned toward the fence and spotted Sylvia Green, hunched slightly under the weight of a plastic grocery bag filled with scraps. She wore a sleeveless blouse faded from years of sun, her wiry gray curls tucked beneath a wide straw hat. 71 years old and barely 5'2", Sylvia moved with the slow caution of someone whose knees no longer trusted stairs. She had been Millstone Elementary's 4th-grade teacher for 3 decades, until her husband's unexpected death left her quieter, more watchful. Now she was known as the woman who fed strays and minded everybody's business without ever asking permission. Jack offered a half smile. "You know this dog?" "Everybody knows Scout," she said, stepping closer. "Not that he cares. Doesn't take to many people." Her eyes twinkled with mischief behind oversized sunglasses. "But he seems to like you." Jack glanced down. The dog, Scout apparently, was still staring at him. Not panting, just waiting. Sylvia leaned her arms on the fence. He's not from around here, you know. Was part of the K-9 unit in Prescott. Heard he got cut loose early, some incident during training or maybe deployment. Some say he disobeyed a command and a rookie got hurt. Others say he saved a kid and got blamed anyway. Either way, nobody claimed him when they retired him. No shelter took him? They tried. He ran away twice. Eventually the sheriff stopped chasing. He just started showing up where he wanted to be. Jack looked at the paper again. He brought this. Sylvia tilted her head, curious. What is it? Jack handed it over. She read the shaky note, then turned it and studied the map. Her brows furrowed, and for a long moment she said nothing. Then, that building? It looks like the old citrus warehouse, out by the train yard. Hasn't been used since the mill closed 6 years ago. I remember it had a basement. Always thought that was strange for a fruit packing plant. You sure? Jack asked. I'm not that old, Carter. I can still recognize a building I drove past every week for 30 years. Jack stared down at Scout. The dog stood now, ears alert. You think this is real? He asked. Sylvia didn't answer right away. Then she said very softly, I think that dog hasn't barked at a soul in 3 years. And if he came all the way here just to bring you that, then someone's still down there. Jack folded the note gently and tucked it into the breast pocket of his faded t-shirt. The wind didn't move, but the heat did, rising like a slow breath from the ground. Scout turned toward the gravel road and walked 3 paces, then stopped and looked back at Jack. Waiting. Jack didn't waste time. By the time the sun was high and cruel, baking the sidewalk into slabs of fire and sending the cicadas into a constant electric buzz, he was already at the Millstone Police Department. The building stood 3 blocks from the old post office, squat and square, its faded beige paint bubbling from the heat. A single flag drooped in the motionless air outside. Inside, the air conditioning wheezed like it was giving up. Behind the front desk sat a man in his early 40s with thinning blonde hair and a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform. His nameplate read Sergeant Ray Benning. He barely looked up when Jack stepped in, dust still clinging to his boots and Scout pacing silently behind him. Afternoon, Jack said, placing the folded paper onto the counter. Found this on my porch. Scout brought it. Benning's eyes finally rose, flicked between Jack, the dog, and the note. He picked it up, unfolded it like it might be a bill from the water company, and read. His expression didn't change. Looks like something a kid scribbled, he said flatly. On the back's a map, Jack added, jaw tightening. Benning flipped it, squinted, shrugged. And? Jack's voice stayed level. I think there's someone trapped. Maybe a kid. This matches a warehouse on the East End, near the rail spur. Has a basement. Benning let out a short breath and leaned back in his chair. Look, Carter, you're home on leave, right? Probably still keyed up. Not everything's a mission. We've got no reports of missing children, no open cases. And stray dogs bring weird crap to folks all the time. Jack's eyes narrowed slightly. And if there's even a 5% chance this note's real, you gonna bet a kid's life on nothing happening? Benning raised his hands. You want to go chasing shadows? Be my guest. Just don't trespass, or I'll have to write you up. Jack didn't respond. He folded the paper and walked out. Scout followed. By late afternoon, they stood at the edge of the old citrus warehouse district, where cracked pavement gave way to dusty weeds and silence. The buildings here were sun-bleached relics, hulking structures of corrugated metal and broken windows. Most were sealed, tagged with fading no-entry signs, but the one Jack was looking for stood apart, L-shaped, covered in ivy that had withered in the heat. The map had been crude, but he recognized the shape. The warehouse hadn't been used in years, not since the packing plant closed. Jack approached carefully, keeping close to the shade of a long dead tree. Scout walked ahead, nose low, tail stiff. The closer they got, the slower the dog moved. Jack noticed it, the subtle change in Scout's gait, shoulders tense, ears twitching. His breathing grew shallower. Near the south wall was a sloped driveway leading down to a rusted loading dock. The metal doors were chained and padlocked, but there, tucked beside a stack of broken pallets, was a short stairwell leading beneath the building. A rotted wooden board lay haphazardly over the top step. Scout stopped, stiff as a statue. A low rumble rolled from his throat, deep and primal. Jack knelt beside him. You know this place? Scout's eyes were fixed on the stairwell. He didn't bark, didn't move, just that steady growl, like something ancient stirring in his gut. The air near the stairs was cooler, but rank, moisture and mold mixed with something metallic. Jack eased forward, pried up the rotting board, and found a set of concrete steps leading into darkness. No light, no sounds, just a heat that didn't match the sun above. Jack clicked on the flashlight he'd brought in his backpack. The beam danced across flaking concrete walls as he descended. Scout stayed at the top for a moment, then followed, paws light despite his weight. The stairwell opened into a wide room, once a storage area, perhaps. Dust floated thick in the beam of the flashlight. Old wire racks rusted along one wall, and then Jack saw them. A line of small rusted folding cots, 2 feet apart, with thin torn blankets still half draped across. A plastic toy car lay on the floor, one wheel missing. A stuffed bear, face smudged with something dark. Jack stepped closer. There were crayon drawings on the wall, stick figures, squiggly suns, a house, and what looked like a van. Scribbled words next to it, not home. And beside those, claw marks. Dozens of them, etched into the plaster like the desperate scratching of small hands. Scout let out a soft whine. He padded toward one of the corners, nose working overtime. Jack followed his gaze to a patch of wall where the cement had cracked in a jagged seam. Someone had tried to peel it open. Jack's breath was shallow now. Someone was here, he muttered. There were no voices, no chains, no doors slamming, but the air carried a weight that settled on his shoulders and refused to lift. He pulled out his phone, took pictures, each cot, each mark, the toys, the wall. Scout walked over to the staircase again. This time he sat, facing out, watching. Jack looked around once more. In the far corner, he saw something new, something that hadn't been in the drawing, a small red bracelet, plastic, the kind given at a hospital. It lay in the dust, broken. Jack picked it up. The inside read, Lila, DOB 0322. He stared at it, then tucked it carefully into his pocket. When he and Scout emerged, the sun was already dropping, but the heat hadn't relented. Jack's shirt clung to his skin, and dust clung to everything else. Scout didn't bark, but as they walked back toward the truck, he kept glancing back, toward the stairwell, the walls, the darkness, like he was listening for something that hadn't stopped calling yet. The next morning was hotter than the last, the kind of heat that pressed on your skin like a second body. Jack sat on the porch steps, the same steps Scout had climbed the day before. He still hadn't unpacked. His bag was where he'd dropped it, half zipped beside the couch. He hadn't slept much either, not after what he'd seen in the warehouse basement. The images clung to him like sweat, the folding cots, the claw marks, and that small plastic hospital bracelet with the name Lila printed in faded red ink. Scout lay in the shade near the fence, his head resting on his front paws. Though the dog's body was still, his eyes tracked every sound, every shifting shadow, every creak of the wind against the porch beam. Jack could tell the animal hadn't rested either. Something had shifted in Scout since yesterday. There was a sharpness to him now, like a wire pulled too tight. Jack stood and grabbed his backpack, this time adding a flashlight, gloves, and a folding knife. The warehouse wasn't done with him. There was more below the surface. He could feel it. The building was even more oppressive under the noon sun. Heat radiated off its metal siding in shimmering waves, and the air reeked of dust, rust, and the distant sting of mildew. Scout led the way without hesitation, descending the concrete stairwell like he'd memorized every step. Back in the basement, the air was heavy. Jack swept his flashlight across the room again. Nothing had changed, but something felt off. As he moved through the rows of cots, his boot struck something metallic. He stopped and knelt, brushing aside dirt and cracked concrete. A small square metal panel. The edge had come loose. He pried it up with his knife. Beneath it, embedded in the floor, was a box. Metal, rusted around the hinges, sealed only with a bent latch. He forced it open. Inside, photographs, black and white, each one showing a child. Most were poorly lit, some clearly taken without consent. A few showed children sitting on the same cots as in the room around him. Some were smiling uneasily. Others stared directly into the lens, expressionless. One image showed a girl about 6 years old curled in the corner, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees, hair tangled and dark. Another photo showed a boy tied at the wrists, standing in what looked like a storage room, his eyes swollen from crying. Jack's hand clenched around the photos. Below them was a worn notebook, thin but neatly written. The cover was blank, but inside, each page was filled with careful entries. L3G74AM Van 12. Ages 4, 9. Condition, quiet, compliant. Room marked red for inspection. He flipped through page after page, the codes continuing. Not just dates, but schedules, descriptions, names, or worse, numbers. His throat tightened. A low growl snapped him from the pages. Scout stood near the stairwell, body taut, eyes locked on the upper steps. Jack shut the box quickly and slid it back into its hole. He replaced the panel and stood silently beside Scout, listening. Footsteps, faint, slow, deliberate. Someone was up there. He clicked off the flashlight. Scout didn't bark, but his hackles rose. Jack placed a hand gently on the dog's side and crouched low. Whoever it was, they were trying not to be heard. The footsteps paused, then moved again, lighter this time. A faint metallic clang followed, like a pipe being kicked or a tool being dropped. Jack whispered, "Out." Scout turned and led the way, guiding Jack to the far wall. There, behind a row of rusted shelving, was a cracked vent cover Jack hadn't noticed before. Scout nudged it with his nose, then slithered through. Jack followed. The vent led to a narrow hallway under the structure, likely part of an old drainage system. It smelled worse, earthy rot mixed with stagnant water, but it got them out of the basement unseen. They emerged into the overgrown alley behind the warehouse, thick with weeds and bordered by broken fences. Jack exhaled slowly. That's when Scout froze, ears forward, a distant sound, rustling fabric. Jack turned. Across the alley, behind a line of market stalls covered in tarp and faded umbrellas, was movement. Scout was already moving, his body lowered, cautious but focused. He darted between crates of old produce and upturned baskets. Then he barked, sharp and sudden. Jack sprinted toward him. Behind one of the stalls, curled under a sagging tarp, was a small form, a child. A little girl, no older than 5. Thin limbs, bare feet caked in dirt, tangled hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She wore a faded pink dress streaked with grime. In her hands, she clutched a torn blanket like it was armor. Scout crouched beside her, tail low, ears forward but not aggressive. Jack knelt carefully. Hey there. The girl didn't speak. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. She flinched when he reached forward but didn't pull away completely. "I'm Jack," he said gently. "This is Scout. We won't hurt you." Still no words. He held out his hand, palm up. The girl stared. Then slowly she reached out and placed her fingers in his. Her hand was ice cold. "What's your name?" Jack asked. A whisper, barely audible. "Lila." He swallowed. "Lila, I think you dropped something." He reached into his pocket and showed her the plastic bracelet. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't cry. She just looked at it, then nodded. Scout leaned in and nudged her shoulder with his nose. That's when she spoke again, voice still fragile. "He told me, if I was quiet, I'd get to go home." Jack's stomach turned. He glanced around, no one else in the alley. The vendor stalls were long closed. This part of town was mostly abandoned in the summer heat, the market only busy on weekends. He scooped her up, careful not to startle her. She was light. Too light. Scout stayed pressed to his leg the entire walk back. That night, Jack didn't go home. He took Lila to the one person in town he trusted. The safe house was a modest one-bedroom tucked above a closed-down florist's shop on Maple Street, just far enough from the center of Millstone to stay unnoticed. Its windows were half covered with sun-faded curtains, and the swamp cooler in the living room groaned against the heat with every breath it took. Jack laid Lila gently onto the worn brown couch, draping a folded blanket over her legs. Scout lay down beside her without command, his broad head resting lightly against the side of the couch like a silent sentry. Lila didn't say a word. Her small hands clutched the edge of Scout's coarse fur, like a child gripping the edge of a stuffed bear. Her wide eyes scanned the room, but never met Jack's. She sat curled, her knees pulled to her chest, pink dress wrinkled and stained, hair tangled and stuck to her cheek with dried sweat and dust. The only sound she made was a faint sigh every now and then, like she was reminding herself she was still breathing. Jack moved carefully, filling a small saucepan with water and opening a can of soup. The scent of chicken broth and carrots slowly pushed away the musty air of silence. He kept glancing at the couch, making sure she hadn't vanished into some ghost state. Scout hadn't moved either, except for the slow, steady rhythm of his breathing. 15 minutes later, the soup was in a chipped ceramic bowl, cool just enough not to burn a child's tongue. Jack knelt beside her. "Hey, Lila," he said softly. "You hungry?" She looked at the bowl, then at Scout, then slowly nodded. Jack handed it to her. She took it with both hands, trembling slightly. Scout shifted closer, his body warm against her side. She ate slowly, quietly. Jack let her finish before speaking again. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you here." No reply. Instead, she reached inside the blanket and pulled out a small piece of chalk, worn to a nub barely an inch long, and a folded napkin she'd hidden in her sock. Carefully, with deliberate effort, she began to draw. Jack watched in silence. It was a building, clearly drawn from memory. Rectangular, featureless. Then a staircase, a hallway. Small boxes marked like rooms, one with a red circle. She looked up at him. Jack pointed. "What's that one?" She whispered. "That's the room with no window." He stared at it. "Is this where they kept you?" She nodded. He took a deep breath. "Do you know what this place is called?" Her lips trembled. "The Black House." Jack felt his spine go cold. Outside, the sun had begun to dip, but the air remained as heavy as ever. He stepped into the kitchen, phone in hand, and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. 3 rings. Then, "Linda Shaw." Jack exhaled. "It's me." A beat of silence. Then, "Jack? You alive?" Linda Shaw had the voice of someone who smoked too many cigarettes, but still had the clarity of a war reporter. Late 30s, short and sharp-tongued, she'd once been embedded with Jack's unit during a joint mission overseas. Her dark hair was always tied up in a messy bun, and she wore combat boots with everything, even when she wasn't on assignment. After an ambush in Aleppo, Jack had carried her 3 miles under gunfire. She hadn't forgotten. "I need your help," Jack said. "You sound like you mean that. I found a girl, 5. Her name's Lila. She escaped something. Underground. I think she was being held." A pause. "She's okay?" "She's safe, for now." Jack told her about the warehouse, about the photos, the box, the notebook. Then he mentioned the name, New Haven Kids, which had been stamped onto the back of one photo like a watermark. Linda's voice dropped. "New Haven? I've heard that name. Nonprofit? Supposedly. Shows up in tax records as a child services foundation. But I've had my eye on them. No public shelters, no clinics. And their grant funding jumps every year, yet there's 0 footprint in any real community." Jack swallowed. "You think it's a front?" "I think they are laundering something. I just never had a witness or evidence." "You do now." He heard her exhale a long breath. "Send me everything. Photos, maps. Notebook if you can. I'll start digging." He paused. "There's more?" "What?" He looked toward the living room. "Lila says they called kids by name. Took them out before dawn. She never heard them come back." On the other end, silence. When Linda finally spoke, her voice had lost all levity. "I'll be on the first flight." Jack hung up and leaned against the fridge. Scout had moved closer to Lila on the couch, his large body now curled around her like a blanket. She was asleep finally, one hand still clutching the nub of chalk. Her other hand, tangled in Scout's fur, rose and fell with every breath the dog took, like she was floating in rhythm with him. Jack watched them, something tight and heavy pressing against his chest, a warmth, maybe, but edged with sorrow. He didn't know who had taught her to trust a dog before a man, but right now, that trust might have been the only thing keeping her tethered to the world. The woods surrounding the so-called Black House were thick with pine and buzzing insects, the summer heat pressing against Jack's back like a second skin. The forest floor crackled beneath their steps, every dried pine needle a potential giveaway. The house loomed ahead, charred black wood, tall metal fencing, and windows deliberately boarded from the inside. From afar, it might have passed as abandoned, but the faint hum of a generator beneath the crawlspace whispered otherwise. Jack crouched behind a fallen log and motioned for Lila to stay low. She was dressed in a loose blue shirt now, far too big for her, tied at the waist with a piece of Scout's leash. Her face, pale and alert, turned to Scout, always to Scout, as if the dog's presence was the only stable thing in her shattered world. Scout, ever quiet, scanned the perimeter with the trained tension of an old K9. His ears twitched, his nose lifted. He didn't bark, but his body spoke in stillness, alert, coiled. Jack had slipped back into a side window half loosened from its frame. He carried nothing more than a flashlight, a backup drive, and an old Marine Corps utility knife. Inside, the air was stale and cool, as if the house had not breathed fresh oxygen in years. The main hall was barren, with walls painted hospital white. No pictures, no furniture, just a single chair at the end of the hall, facing a closed door. He moved quickly. A room to the left revealed a small office setup, 2 monitors, a blinking hard drive, and an open laptop. Jack sat down, fingers moving across the keyboard. No password. What opened next chilled him. Video files, hundreds of them, each labeled with a name and a date. He clicked the most recent one, child_47 vertical bar, June 13th. A pale boy, maybe 9, sat on a stool in a dark room, a light beaming into his face. A voice off camera asked questions. The boy shook his head. Silence. Then a slap. The boy cried out. Jack shut the video down. Scrolling further, he found PDF manifests labeled extraction logs and transit intel. The dates matched the early hours Lila described, 4 a.m., loaded into a van, never seen again. He copied everything to the external drive. Meanwhile, Scout had nudged Lila gently with his snout, guiding her through the woods toward a small abandoned ranger cabin. Its roof sagged with moss, and the wood had weathered silver gray. Still, it was dry, hidden, and far enough from the black house to be safe, at least for now. Inside, Lila crawled into a dusty bunk and clutched Scout's ear with both hands. "You'll come back, right?" she whispered, her voice breaking the silence. Scout, unable to speak, only licked her hand once and turned to wait by the door. His breath was shallow, but his eyes never left the tree line. Back at the black house, Jack was nearly done. One last folder, labeled Donor Relations, opened to reveal correspondence between shadowed names, logistics about clean routes, and cryptic notes about product freshness. One message chilled him. Arizona chapter will be shut down after next cycle. Too much noise. He snapped the drive shut. That's when he heard it. Outside, movement, fast, multiple feet. Jack bolted from the office, sliding back through the window into the humid breath of the forest. He ran. He didn't see Scout until he was nearly at the trailhead. The dog was limping, a fresh gash across his shoulder bleeding through matted fur. In front of him, a man in a gray hoodie lay face down, unconscious, one arm twisted behind him at a grotesque angle. Lila screamed. Jack rushed forward, cradled Scout's face. "What happened?" Scout staggered but didn't fall. His tail gave one weak thump against the grass. Lila pointed. "That man, he grabbed me, said they were coming back for me." Jack's pulse pounded. He checked the man, still breathing but badly injured. "Scout did this?" She nodded, eyes wide. Jack's voice cracked. "Good boy." The trail was no longer safe. He scooped Scout into his arms, barely managing the dog's weight, and turned to Lila. "We're going to the sheriff's office, now." "No!" Lila cried. "They work with them. The badge man. I saw him there." Jack froze. "Are you sure?" Her face told him everything. He changed direction. They wouldn't go to the law. They'd go to Linda. The cabin behind Linda's bookstore smelled faintly of mint tea and sun-dried paper. It was a converted reading shed, old pine wood walls, wide windows now covered with blackout curtains, and a faint hum of an old oscillating fan pushing the stale heat from corner to corner. Millstone's summer was unrelenting, a dry heat that clung to the skin and made tempers shorter, movement slower. Scout lay on a folded quilt in the center of the room, bandaged and still. His flank rose and fell with shallow breaths. The wound across his shoulder had been cleaned and stitched with the help of Linda's steady hands. her training from years ago as a paramedic proving invaluable. Linda Harper, 43, was the kind of woman who moved like she was always mid-task. Wiry frame, sharp jawline, black hair cut into a blunt bob that curled naturally from humidity. Her green eyes were alert, always scanning, and her voice held the tired wisdom of someone who had long since given up illusions about justice being fair. She used to work as an EMT in Phoenix, but returned to Millstone after losing her younger sister in a hit-and-run that was never solved. Since then, she'd become something of a quiet watchdog, fixing, mending, remembering. Jack sat beside Scout, brushing his hand gently over the dog's uninjured fur. Lila was curled against his leg, hugging her knees. She had begun to trust him, just barely. Her voice still faltered, but there were moments, flickers, when her words came out whole. "Is he gonna die?" she asked, her voice no louder than the hum of the fan. "No, sweetheart," Jack said. "He's a soldier, just like me. He's fought harder battles than this." She looked up at him then. "You're a soldier?" "Only for a little while longer, just home on leave." Lila nodded solemnly. "Then I'll call you Uncle Soldier." Jack smiled, surprised by the sudden warmth that swept through his chest. Linda re-entered, wiping her hands on a cloth. "He's stable, but he needs rest, and probably stitches from a real vet within 24 hours. Jack nodded. "Can't risk taking him into town. Not yet. We're being watched." "I know," Linda replied grimly. "That's why I made you this." She handed him a flash drive and a manila folder. Inside were printouts of emails, location maps, and financial statements. Evidence tying New Haven kids to a chain of shell nonprofits. One email showed the routing of international wires through a bank in Belize. Another, blurred but legible, was a manifest for transfer items with initials and birth dates. But one photo stopped Jack cold. A little girl, no more than 8, curly blonde hair, bright braces, standing in front of a swing set. The image had been cropped poorly, but the caption read, "Subject hash, G47 vertical bar, last seen, Millstone." Linda's voice dropped. Her name was Grace Allerton, Sheriff Allerton's niece, disappeared 3 years ago during the town fair. Jack stared at the name. "Sheriff Allerton, the former sheriff?" "Yes, retired 6 months after Grace vanished. Rumors say it broke him, took early pension and left town." "Do you think he knew?" Jack asked. Linda hesitated. "No, but if we bring him back into this, it could crack something wide open." Jack closed the folder. Then came a knock, a soft one, measured. Jack's hand went to his knife. Linda approached the door with a whisper of caution. Outside stood a tall man in a light gray suit, sleeves rolled neatly up to his elbows despite the heat. His skin was olive-toned, hair jet black and slicked back, eyes shielded by dark aviators. He looked too polished, too unbothered to be from Millstone. He flashed a badge. "Agent Marcus Levin, FBI. I'm not here officially, but I need to speak with whoever uncovered the contents of that drive." Jack stepped forward slowly. "That would be me." Levin removed his glasses. His eyes were calm but sharp. "We've been monitoring New Haven kids for months. You just lit the match we needed." Jack crossed his arms. "Then arrest them." "We can't, not yet," Levin said. "If this leaks, they'll torch everything. Move the kids, bury the proof. We need to keep this quiet until we extract everyone safely." Linda stepped in. "And how long will that take?" 72 hours, Levin answered. "I'll need copies of everything. We'll provide surveillance, but don't go rogue. Don't contact the press. And above all, don't trust local law enforcement. Some of them might not be clean." Lila pressed closer to Jack's side. Her small hand found his. Levin's eyes flicked to her but softened. "You got her out?" "She got herself out," Jack said. "Scout just showed me where to look." At the mention of Scout's name, the dog stirred. A weak growl rose in his throat. Not fear, but instinct. Levin stepped back respectfully. "Take care of him," he said. "Dogs like that, they're rare. They don't give up until they've brought every child home." The woods behind the black house were no longer just shadows and rustling leaves. They were a live wire, pulsing with the silent breath of an operation unfolding in real time. It was a muggy summer night, the kind that made sweat cling under the collar and bugs swirl like warnings in the air. Jack crouched low behind a cluster of palmettos, hand steady on Scout's collar. The German shepherd, battle-scarred, eyes sharp like twin amber lights, stood alert but calm. The stitches on his shoulder pulled slightly as he breathed, but his tail stayed still, low to the ground, his mind locked in. Scout had rested, yes, but rest was never permanent for dogs like him. He was born to run toward danger. Beside Jack, Agent Marcus Levin clicked on his comms. Teams Alpha and Bravo in position, Delta on standby. No gunfire unless fired upon. Let's bring them home. Jack gave Scout the cue, 2 silent taps on the harness. The dog moved like liquid shadow, slipping ahead to sniff the path that led around the west corridor of the Black House compound. Trees had swallowed most of the structure from view, but the rotten metal gate and back sheds remained untouched, places no sane adult would step foot in unless they had something to hide. A soft chirp in Jack's ear. Entry cleared, target doors unlocked. Scout stopped. Ears perked. A growl started low in his throat, not loud, but urgent. Jack's hand went to his sidearm, and then they heard it. A child's cry. Not loud, not panicked, but sharp, cutting through the sticky air like broken glass underfoot. Jack moved. So did Scout. They slipped into the west corridor through a broken frame of what once had been a pantry. Mold crept up the walls. Inside, bunk beds stacked 3 high filled the space, the smell of mildew mixing with bleach and urine. Jack scanned the room. Empty. Scout darted toward a loose panel at the end of the wall. With a scratch and a nudge, he revealed a narrow tunnel entrance, just barely wide enough for a child. Jack climbed in after him. The passage opened into a hidden chamber, dimly lit by an emergency bulb swinging from a wire. And there they were, 17 children. Silent. Huddled together on old mattresses, knees pulled to chests, eyes wide with something deeper than fear. Resignation. One of the girls, no more than 8, had golden braids frayed at the ends. She recognized Lila immediately and whispered, "She got out." Jack swallowed hard. "I'm here to take you out too." Scout patted among the kids, nudging hands, sniffing gently at cheeks, pausing longer beside the girl with the braids. She curled into his side without a word. From behind, agents moved in, carrying blankets, food packets, and filtered water. No questions. No shouting. Only quiet reassurance. Meanwhile, Linda had stationed herself by the perimeter. Camera in hand, she documented everything. Careful framing, intentional focus on environment, never faces. Her experience as a journalist never fully faded. After the loss of her sister, she had stopped chasing headlines and started chasing truths, but with boundaries. No child would be paraded for public pity on her watch. She whispered to the lens, "Let the world see the walls, the dirt, the chains, but not the eyes, not the names." As the last of the children were escorted out, Scout lingered by a locked room. His hackles rose. Jack turned the key provided by one of the agents and froze. Inside stood a woman in her mid-50s. Graying blonde hair tied into a low bun, she wore pale scrubs, stained at the hem, and held a clipboard with a shaking hand. Her name tag had been removed, but Jack recognized her from a photograph Lila had drawn earlier, down to the uneven glasses and narrow chin. "Don't hurt me," she pleaded, voice wavering. "I was just the caretaker." Jack didn't lower his gun. "You're the nurse who tended to Lila?" "I kept them fed," she insisted. "Gave them medicine. I didn't choose this." "You stayed," Jack said coldly. The agents behind him cuffed her without ceremony. As she passed Scout, the dog snarled, a sound that had nothing to do with threat and everything to do with memory. Lila, waiting by a safe van with Linda, caught sight of the woman being led out. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She simply turned and hugged Scout, pressing her face into his fur, tiny shoulders trembling. Scout didn't move. He just sat still, letting her cry. The dog that once had no master now held in his chest the weight of 17. The Arizona summer waned into golden dusk, where the heat mellowed into a soft, humming warmth that bathed the town of Millstone in late evening light. Jack Carter stood quietly on the porch of the modest brick house on Elm Street, the same one he'd grown up in, the same one he never thought he'd return to with more than a suitcase. But now, beside him, nestled against his leg with a pink blanket in her lap, was a 5-year-old girl who had changed everything. Lila Carter. She had chosen the last name herself. Jack hadn't asked for it. After all, names were power to children who had theirs stripped away. The first time she wrote it, shakily with backward R, on her coloring book, she had looked up at him and simply said, "So I don't forget who I belong to now." Jack still wasn't used to being anyone's belonging. He had fought wars and built walls around himself to avoid just that. But Lila had slipped past them with her silences, her drawings, and her habit of sleeping with one hand curled in Scout's fur. Scout. The battle-scarred, one-eyed German shepherd with a heart no human could cage. He was stretched across the living room rug now, one eye closed, the other open just enough to follow Lila as she danced around the room holding her latest masterpiece, a crayon drawing of 3 figures beneath a golden sky. One stick figure wore a soldier's hat, one had 4 legs and a wagging tail, and one, a small girl with a swirl of yellow hair, stood in between, holding their hands. Below it, she had written in crooked letters, "Scout came back and brought me home." Jack knelt beside her. "Can I keep that one?" "Nope," she grinned. "It's going on the fridge." The door creaked behind them, and in stepped Linda Marin, still in her dusty hiking boots and tan cargo vest. Her camera bag hung from her shoulder, heavier now with footage than fear. Her sharp cheekbones, usually unreadable, had softened over the past week. She was still driven, still the journalist who'd uncovered corruption from Haiti to D.C., but something about Millstone, and about Lila, had made her voice quieter and her steps less rushed. "I just got confirmation," Linda said, slipping her phone into her back pocket. "The segment's airing tonight, prime time, nationwide." Jack raised a brow. "You sure that's safe?" She nodded. "Faces are blurred, locations disguised, but the truth, that part's loud." She didn't need to say more. They all knew what this was about. Over the last week, Linda's footage had been reviewed by state attorneys, FBI, and investigative journalists across the country. The evidence of the underground child trafficking network, hidden beneath the cover of New Haven Kids, had sparked outrage. But what shocked the nation more was the name that popped up repeatedly in shipment manifests and internal emails. Mayor Clay Moore, a man once praised for expanding youth programs, who smiled broadly at charity banquets, who posed with foster kids for photo ops. Now, behind bars, awaiting federal charges, his carefully constructed facade was crumbling, and the nation was watching. Linda flicked on the TV in the background. The news anchor's voice spilled into the room. "Tonight, we bring you an exclusive investigation into a hidden network exploiting children across state lines. At the center of this exposé, a brave little girl, a war-scarred dog, and the soldier who refused to look away." Lila looked up from where she sat beside Scout and tugged on Jack's sleeve. "That's us." "Yeah, kid," Jack whispered, rubbing her back gently. "That's us." Scout let out a low rumble, not a growl, just a contented sound, like the thrum of an old engine still loyal to its driver. He shifted, curling closer to Lila's feet, as if to remind her that even when the world had failed, he hadn't, and he never would. Later that night, after the broadcast sent shockwaves through every corner of social media, and after Lila had fallen asleep in her new bed, with Scout standing sentinel beside her, Jack sat on the porch again. A soft summer wind rustled the wind chimes overhead. It wasn't the battlefield. It wasn't the war zone he'd been trained for, but it had been a war, and they had won. He pulled a folded note from his shirt pocket, the very first one, the one Scout had delivered, teeth marks still faint at the edge, with the scrawled message that started it all. "Please help, no windows, so dark." Now there were windows, now there was light. In Jack's journey with Lila and Scout, we did not just witness a dramatic rescue, we saw something deeper, a quiet miracle. Not loud like thunder, but gentle like a breath. Like a little girl finally sleeping safely, held by love she never knew she could trust. When Scout carried that torn piece of paper and dropped it at Jack's door, perhaps it was not just instinct. Perhaps it was something more. A whisper from God. A message carried through the broken body of a discarded dog, through a scarred paw and a single eye, to reach the heart of a man who had forgotten his own purpose. Sometimes, God does not come in a blaze of light. He comes quietly, in silence, in a dog's bark, in a soldier's decision to knock on a door no one else dared open, In our daily lives, we may never enter a warehouse or uncover a hidden trapdoor, but every day, we have the chance to become someone's Jack or someone's Scout, to listen, to notice, to act, to become the quiet answer to a desperate prayer. If you believe God still sends miracles, even in small moments, write Amen in the comments as a silent prayer for the children who are still lost and for those still searching for the courage to help. Share this video to help others see the beauty of compassion and bravery. Comment if you have ever witnessed a quiet act of kindness that changed everything. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that carry hope and truth. God may not always speak in thunder. Sometimes He sends a dog.